Before I tell you about the Dead Sea Scrolls, 2 years before the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it took many years to start getting them translated, beyond that, there was a discovery in Egypt called the Nag, N-A-G, Hammadi codexes. And what is Nag Hammadi? That's the place in Egypt where they found them, so that's why they're called that. They are called, or what is called, the Gnostic Gospels. Gnostic is the Greek word for knowledge, and there was a movement in the 3rd century, and the early church writer Eusebius wrote about this, condemning the writings and that they were not original. They're not the original writings. They're also written in Coptic Egyptian writing. And what Coptic Egyptian writing is, they use Greek symbols to bring out Egyptian sounds. So it's the Egyptian language kind of written in a soft, massaged Greek. So they wouldn't have been New Testament writing, because the New Testament's written in what? Greek only, Koine Greek. The Gnostics believed that knowledge was supreme above everything. And so they believed, and what they ended up, to make a long story short, was the Gnostic writings, and there's probably a good, couple of dozen different of the books, and they're all together, and it's the only set that had ever been found. But they knew what was in them based on early church writers condemning what they were. And it was early church Christians that had a lot of Greek baggage, mythology with them, and so they tried to blend in Greek mythology into Old Testament and New Testament gods and bring their mythology into that. So that's kind of a umbrella view of that. That was found a couple of years before the Dead Sea Scrolls. During that time period, the Bible was coming in the early 50s, and then the 40s. People were starting to really come down on the Bible because they said it had been corrupted over the centuries. And the oldest Old Testament writing we had dated to 1000 AD. Okay? So it was 1,000 years after the time of Christ. That was the oldest Old Testament document that we had. And so then these Nag Hammadi things, and they have the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of, and you heard about the Gospel of Judas that came out a few years back. That's kind of like a part of that, and that was known about for forever. And so anyway, these were fake writings, but people latched onto it. And probably 2010 or 2015, archaeological magazine called Biblical Archaeology, it was a very liberal magazine, said that Nag Hammadi discovery was the greatest discovery in the 20th century, which they're not even in Scripture. God blessed us with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls that come right after this terrible monstrosity, these Nag Hammadi Gospels that come out, which are just trash. I mean, it's like dime store novel trash compared to the Scriptures. And it's so obvious to see. So we're looking at this area called Qumran, and it's at the northwest, northern tip of the Dead Sea area. Okay, so there were 981 different manuscripts, and they discovered them over a period between 46 and 56. The way the first ones were discovered was by shepherd boys, and one threw a rock. You know the story? The one threw a rock up there, and he heard a crack and goes up to investigate. So somehow then he brings them back to the sheep herder guys, and they said, hey, let's take them in and sell them at the market. And then there's an archaeologist that was going through, and he finds that these are being sold at the market, and then he alerts the Israeli authority, and then they track all this stuff down and see if they can get everything back. And then from there, they began searching the other caves in the area. So you can see here that it's in this area up in here, and Jerusalem's right over this way. Okay, so the road to Jericho's over this way, and then you got Cumran. So this is probably the most famous picture because this is, I think, where the parking lot is, and everybody takes that picture. And actually, yeah, there's Cave 1, and Cave 1, I am, from memory, saying that this is where the great Isaiah scroll was discovered, in Cave 1. And so here you have oops. Yeah, you're right, this is backwards. And I know it, but so Q1, so it means Qumran, so it's Cave 1, Qumran, Cave 2, Qumran. So there's a good dozen or so caves there. The interior of the cave, one of the caves that was discovered. And then this is the settlement that is on top of the mounds where the caves are discovered. This was settled, and the people that are called there, the group is called the Essenes. And the Essenes are a stricter sect of the Sadducees. Okay? And we'll get into that. There were three ancient writers two were non-Jewish, that wrote about the text and about the Essenes. And they had some pretty extreme ways about them. So this is an artist's rendition of how it probably looked at that time. And so it is a settlement. They had some wealthy people that gave up everything to come here and live a life of purity. I guess it's almost something similar to the Catholic monastery way of life. And in the Old Testament, you have a priest that's named Zadok, okay? And we see that in, of course, I didn't give you the book or chapter. You'll have to figure that out yourself. But in he is David's priest. There are two priests, and there is Zadok anoints Solomon as king, and he becomes high priest under Solomon's rule. Okay. In the New Testament, you see Zadok's name, only it's called Sadducee. So in the New Testament, Sadducee means righteous. In the Old Testament, this man named Zadok means righteous. You guys know that already. I see five. So the Essenes, they have some ancient writers that came there to observe the Essenes, and some of the things they have to say about are they can't believe people live in this extreme fashion. So Philo of Alexandria, Pliny the Elder, and Josephus all write about them. And this is just a general statement that I took off. And so they were wealthy people, the Essenes in Jerusalem. And again, like I said, they are part of the high priesthood, but they even segregated themselves even more. And they dedicated their lives to the scriptures and preserving the scriptures. And fortunately for us, they did that because there's a lot of things that they did that we benefit from today. That when Pliny the Elder was there, and by the way, when Pliny the Elder was there looking around in that area, he was in charge of the Navy, and he was looking for the best wood to build ships from. And he found that the best wood to make a naval ship from was in the Sinai Peninsula, where they get the, well, in the Old Testament, it's called the shittim wood. In the other translations, what's it called? The shittim wood is also called acacia wood. And so the acacia wood in the Sinai Peninsula when Pliny the Elder was there, then he must have gone here as well looking for this wood. He found that the acacia wood was insect resistant. There was no insects that would chew it or they don't want it. It was mold resistant. It was rot resistant. And it would have been perfect for ships because they would have lasted 10 to 12 times longer than the ships they were making out of the other ones. The problem was there's not very much of it. It's only in that peninsula area. But guess what they made out of that? Remember, they made the Ark of the Covenant out of that, and also the things from the tabernacle. And remember, God told Moses what to make that out of. And then Pliny the Elder then comes through in that later history confirming what we already know. So just amazing. So part of the Essenes ritual, which was daily bathing, which was unheard of in that time period. So they had, in this desert place, they had mikvahs, and these are pools for the bathing. They ate their food in silence. And, you know, I like that. I still like that today. I like to just get off somewhere and eat my sandwich because today I had 3 interruptions, and so it took me 3 hours to eat. So I'm just kidding. So they sought to remain celibate. So if they weren't married and they became an Essene, they were encouraged never to marry. They had very strict observance of the Sabbath. And you say, well, Bob, how strictly can you observe the Sabbath? They put their latrine, to say the nice word, where they would, the latrine was away from the settlement. So they didn't have a latrine inside the settlement. It was outside the settlement. And guess how far they put it away? It was 2 Sabbath day journeys away from the settlement. That way, they were encouraged not to use the restroom on the Sabbath day so they would not defile their fleshly bodies. And that's the thing that Philo and Pliny notice about it. Now, this is extreme. You know, they wouldn't even go to the bathroom on the Sabbath day, so they wouldn't be defiled. And, you know, that's pretty strict. But you take that fanaticism in copying the Holy Scriptures, and they did it to perfection. There was no room for error. And remember, God told them when Moses wrote down the law that they were neither to what? Add to nor take away from that. And we also see that in the book of Revelation. And they, to their credit, they did that. And they had a system of checks and the way they could count the columns and the letters and the numbers, and if they didn't add up, they didn't even try to find a mistake. They destroyed the document. And they burned it and made sure that it wasn't used. This is one of the mikvahs baths that was discovered there. And it's hard to believe that in an area like this that there's that much water, but when it rains hard, and all the water funnels down into what are called these wadis, W-A-D-I. And these wadis, they channeled the water from the wadi so it would go and was directed into these areas where they preserved the water. They had mikvah baths, they had other places where they had water for food and or to clean and cook and all these different things. This is from a model that I made, and according to Josephus, and there's Herod's palace. This is the upper echelon area of the newer part of Jerusalem during the days of Herod the Great. The red roof buildings represent Roman villas. And this is called, according to Josephus in those days, the Gate of the Essenes. So they even had a gate named after them. It's believed that Annas' and Caiaphas' house was up in this area, and also the tomb of David was somewhere nearby there. But again, we're just going based on the writings of Josephus. These are some other reservoirs for the water. And so totally what were found in the Dead Sea grouping Now, there are things outside the Bible, other Jewish writings that are there. So don't think that they only found scriptures. They found other writings, but we're just concerned with the scriptures that were found. So they found this many copies of these books. And for the Jews, the most important books are the Torah, which are the first 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And so you see that there. And then of course, people have asked me, well, what about New Testament books? Well, these are Jews. This is before the New Testament. So the New Testament writings are another animal to deal with somewhere else. So no New Testament writings found at the Qumran area. These are the type of jars. In fact, these are some of the jars that have been repaired that were in the caves. I've been wanting to get a full-size jar to take, and like, I'm a glutton for punishment. You know, what else can I find to haul around the nation to get broke? And they break very easily, someone that has one. But I could get one for $60, but they charge $250 to ship it. So I think I'll do without that for a while. Now, back there on my banner, and you can, if you are quick, you can QR code this right here. It will take you to the website where this is. And this is the Great Isaiah Scroll. And it will take you there, and you can put your cursor over this area, and it translates it into the English. And guess, does it work?
Oh, I agree.
And guess what? It is the same as the Bibles that you have.
Yeah, it does. It works.
So let's say this is 1000 AD, and that the cross is at the end of that pew. Okay, so that's 1000 AD, and let's say this is 1950 over there where you're sitting. Okay, so 1000 AD. So that Great Isaiah Scroll goes not only back to Jesus, but it goes beyond perhaps 250 years, but they will conservatively say at least 150 years before Jesus was born. So look how much further away it is, and it was exactly the same. And so the critics that were growing, and then the Nag Hammadi things are found, and everyone's clamoring the Bible it has not been faithfully kept in terms of its translation. And then God gives us 2 years or 3 years later, He gives that to us. If you had any doubts, okay, here. Young man, you go out and throw a rock at this cave, and you find this. Why are these things here? It's believed that the Essenes knew about the destruction of Jerusalem. The Jews are coming down. They're going to go to Masada, where the rest of the Jews are going to try to make their defense, and they're going to march right through this area. And what are they going to do? They're going to hide what they have dedicated their lives to preserve these things, and what are they that hide them in these caves? And I think by the providence of God, they were preserved. I want to believe that. You can believe otherwise, but personally, that's what I believe, because He knew that there were going to be people that were going to start doubting their faith. In the first century, to confirm the Word of God, the apostles had the ability to perform miracles, right? But the miracles ended after the apostles, after the ones that they had laid hands on. They couldn't pass that on. And 1 Corinthians 13 deals with this, that there is not going to be any more age of miracles. There's not going to be any more tongues. But what will remain will be what? Faith, hope, and love, and the grace of Jesus' love. But as we get to these ages where we are being more and more challenged, we're further and further away from the cross in time, God is giving us these little nuggets that confirm his word with archaeology. And it's not a very old field. It began basically in the 1800s by men that were looking for the biblical places that people said never existed. They said, there could be no city of Nineveh. There was never any city that large. And so what? They take the Bible and they go out into Iraq and wander around and they find it. And the Arabs there, when they began to dig down, they said, we've been walking over this great city all of our lives and our forefathers, and we never knew it was there. And it was there. And it was as big, and it had a library there at Nineveh, and that library had contained books and charts, which it took years to start to be able to translate these things. But when they translated them, they found out, oh, this talks about the event that happened. Oh, this talks about the event happened. This talks about the event having been in the Bible. So this tells you exactly what I was just talking about. 54 columns, all 66 chapters are in there. The great Isaiah scroll, which we just talked about, is missing one verse. Oh, we get panicked. The other copies of Isaiah that were there all have that verse in it. It's the last verse of chapter 2. And it doesn't really change any context. In fact, if that verse happened to miss being in the scriptures from here forward, we would still understand what we need to do to be saved. But the skeptics will always try to find something to try to, and that's the verse that's missing in the great Isaiah scroll. But everything else is spot on. Not one jot, not one tittle had been changed. Enter into the rock and hide in the dust from the terror of the Lord and the glory of his majesty. But it was in the other Isaiah scrolls. This was a video link, but it probably isn't going to work here. The great Isaiah scroll is considered by the Jews to be, this man will say, it's their Mona Lisa. And their Mona Lisa, they keep it underneath the Museum of the Scroll. The one you see upstairs, if you go all the way to Israel, is a replica, and it's going to look like mine. Although theirs is hand done. Somebody actually hand did. And I don't think... Oh, here we go.
You are in a very special place. Right now, you are at the Holy of Holies of the Son of the Book, where the Dead Sea Scrolls are kept. Let's see. Come with me.
I've had people tell me they've been down here to see it, and I said that it only took a few people, and they won't let, only he and that lady there can go in there. And it's real dark, and you can't see. There it is.
I am about to show you our Mona Lisa, the most important cultural treasure of the Jewish nation. Is the Great Isaiah Scroll, the second largest scroll discovered in Qumran caves, containing all the 66 chapters of the prophet Isaiah you have in our Bibles. Take a look at the manuscript. This is the real Isaiah Scroll. It has 2,100 years, and you can read from it. Hazon Yeshayahu ben Amos, Asher Chazal Yerushalayim al Yehuda, the vision of the prophet Isaiah, mentioning the city of Jerusalem, the same city that today is located the Shrine of the Book, and wherein the Isaiah scroll is on display. I invite you to read the same words from the Bible on the internet version and to enjoy the content of the prophet Isaiah.
So that earlier QR code, you can find that little clip there. Now, you can find this on the Apologetics Press website, and this is interesting. So let's look at Homer's Iliad was written in 700 BC. And we don't know when the earliest manuscript was, but there is an incredible amount of manuscripts preserved. It's the most of any ancient book, I think, 643. And so from 700 BC, but they only agree about 80%. So 20% of them, the copiers took liberty to change the story somewhat. Then you've got Herodotus, histories, and archaeology bank on this guy and what he says. And if he got anything wrong, there's really nothing else to check on. And guess how many copies there are? Well, he was in 425 BC when he wrote. His earliest manuscript was about the same as the Old Testament. So there's a 1,325-year gap there, and there's only 8 copies. And I'm not talking about copies that they republished, but original copies that are 1,325 years old. But archaeologists will bank on this man's words, and he was one man. In the Old Testament, how many authors do we have in the Old Testament? There are, how many books in the Old Testament? 39. So how many different authors? The 28? And they all harmonize. Oh, by the way, these 8 copies, the percentage is still about 80%, I think, is the highest. So I don't have a percentage there. Josephus, he wrote in 70 AD. The earliest manuscript we have that survived is 400 AD. So all that period of time, there's other copies being written. There's only 9 that go back, that even one of those go back that far. And again, 80%, that's the most closest they stay to whatever the original was. Tacitus, the histories, there's only 8 copies. The liberal archaeologists will stand by these dates and the things that these people say, but then they say the Bible's myth, and we can't bank on it. The New Testament has, the oldest documents we have are 125 AD. There's only a 25 to 90 year gap period between when it was written and the oldest documents that we have. Look at these others. Now, look how many number of manuscripts. That's not counting scraps and pieces and little pieces of this or that. These are complete manuscripts. 98.7%. And you say, well, why is that? Because they use a very strict grading average, and in some of those copies, it may say the Lord Jesus Christ. But in another manuscript, it might say our Lord Jesus Christ. So they count that as a disparity, okay? And but it changes no meaning at all. There is no change of meaning in any of those changes. It's amazing how many people that teach Bible and different things, like at Harvard University, will criticize the Bible and its inaccuracies, but they have no clue about this chart, and they're teaching at a doctorate level classes. And the facts are out there. There are people that have done this research. And some of the people that do this research aren't trying to prove the Bible, they've been trying to disprove the Bible. Now I want to tell you about the Ketif Hennock Scrolls. And probably some of you have heard this already in the back. But it means the shoulder of Hinnom. And there were a lot of the rock-hewn tombs, like Jesus was buried in this valley. And this man, his name is Professor Bartlett. And he's still alive, which surprised me. I didn't think he'd look like he'd still be alive. But this is 1979. This is nearby the tomb there, and he didn't have a budget. he was an archaeologist, but he really didn't have any finances behind him, so he took a different approach, and he went to places that had already been excavated, and he's just looking for clues and some old things that maybe got missed on the first go around. And so he employs for free school kids. And they get out of school, they come out, and they help him look through these tombs, and he has a 14, 15-year-old boy. They had several of them. And he gives them the little archaeologist hammer, and it's like a small little hammer that you chip away at the stone so you don't damage anything too much. And so the boy did what boys do, and he went in, and he's whacking the wall in this one particular tomb, and it turns out that it's hollow. And it breaks apart, and there's actually quite a few pottery artifacts and some other things, but in that tomb are two little cigarette butt looking things. And they were silver, but they were tarnished, and they were rolled up. And he recognized them as having writing on them. And so they took them. And so in Israel, they didn't know how to unroll these without damaging them. Now, I think they have technology now that can help with this, but they had to come up with technology because they went to all of the major museums in the world and asked them to unroll these scrolls, and they all declined because they said, we will damage them, and we don't want to do it. So there was no technology. So it took 10, 15 years to develop the technology after they were discovered, and then they unrolled them. And why is this important? These are very important because you watch a documentary about Jewish history, anything to do with the Old Testament, and like on your Discovery Channel, and the people that are giving these lectures, they don't want to be discredited by their peers, so they take the liberal position that the Bible, this is the position today, that the Old Testament was written while the Jews were in Babylonian captivity. That's the position. That all the Jewish history was written while they were in Babylonian captivity. I guess they had nothing else to do, so they pulled together their thoughts and came up with this, with the Old Testament. And that just isn't true. So this is part of the tomb in which it was discovered in, and so it was kind of crumbly. And so one of the scrolls contains "May be blessed by Yahweh or God, the warrior helper, the rebuker of evil. May bless you, Yahweh, keep you, make you shine." Now keep in mind, some of these things have been broken off. And so it is Numbers chapter 6, verses 24 through 26, from lines 5 to 12. And then the larger one you have here, you have Exodus on there, and it's the same passage. So it's these, excuse me, it's in Exodus and Deuteronomy. And so that is this passage here. Now, they're written in Paleo-Hebrew. So that dates them well before Babylonian captivity. Now, there's a lot of conservative people out there that don't, well, we don't want to make it too old, and so they say it's 625. That doesn't put it that far ahead of Babylonian captivity. But what does put it ahead of Babylonian captivity is the Paleo-Hebrew. Paleo-Hebrew shifts it another 100 to 150 years before that. Now, when I was researching this, and I tell you, I will be honest, I don't know Paleo-Hebrew. So I had to go in, I was researching Paleo-Hebrew, what it was, how long of a period it was done. And Hebrew today, the letter T in Hebrew is sort of a lazy line that kind of comes down, almost like a you take the curved part off the C and you just kind of curve it on down around like that, and then you cross it. So it's kind of a lazy T. It looks like it's kind of falling down or falling over like this. But the paleo T is a vertical line perfectly up and down, and then a horizontal line 180 degrees to that. It looks like a cross. The letter T, the Hebrew alphabet, the letters have meanings besides that. So like because we take our language sometimes and look at the Greek alphabet, we have, for our letter A, we talk about the alpha. And what does alpha mean? It has a meaning, doesn't it? You say he's an alpha dog. You know, he's the leader, right? He's the beginning. I'm the alpha, the omega. So Hebrew has something similar to that as well. And so that letter T means covenant. Now your eyes are kind of opening up, right? You kind of, well, think of that Paleo Hebrew, it's cross. And you can say, well, they put the stakes at the covenant of the land boundaries. Yeah, they did that. And God made a covenant with the people. And then that covenant, the old covenant, was done away. It's like an old garment. It's been put away. But now we have a new covenant. This is my blood of the what? New covenant. And where was the blood shed? Upon the cross. Isn't that kind of weird how that all ties together? So, Obed, I'm at the end of my slides. Did you want to continue on with it? Or? I'm just giving you a hard time. So, since this is kind of an open forum, do you have any comments or questions that I can't answer? Anybody? Isn't this kind of neat, Gene?
Where they found it is these roads. No one had gone in there, obviously, for a long time. Were they kind of hidden back in there, and where they couldn't see them or couldn't access them, or how was that?
The caves are, let's put it this way. Unless you're a rock climber today, you wouldn't go up there. You wouldn't go to those caves. You would say, hey, there's a cave up there. Hey, that cave can stay up there. The only kind of people that would go up there are people that were desperate, right? They have found some other caves this last year. They're just down from here, and they're up on a ledge, and these archaeologists went up there to check out something else, and guess what they found? They found like 9 almost perfectly preserved Roman swords. And they think that some Jews stole the swords from the Romans when they were down there. So between 70 and 73 AD, I think these went into those caves. So they've been in there how many years? Let's do the calculation. 1950 or 1940s to 70 to 73. Someone got a calculator? Figure that out, how many years they were there. That's a long time. Just sitting there for somebody. Somebody could have discovered them way before that, but I'm glad that they were discovered in my generation. And it just makes my faith even, would I die for my faith? Yes, I would die for my faith because I believe the Bible. And if we don't believe the Bible, why live? Because there's no hope. And it's coming in this country. Matt Vega, I'll end with this. Matt Vega is an attorney, and Matt Vega went to Pre-Hardeman University. When he graduated, and I forget how it happened, but the CIA approached Matt Vega, and they said, would you be interested in working for us? And he said, well, what would I have to do? And they said, we want you to go to Harvard Law School and get a law degree, and we will pay for it. And he said, okay. I don't know if you got to do anything else that he just can't tell us. But he told me the story one time. And he got that law degree. And I had a good reason to tell you this. And so Matt Vega was at Polishing the Pulpits a couple years back. And he was talking that he had the privilege to go to Switzerland, to a Church of Christ there in Switzerland. And he said it was the most beautiful morning up in the mountains. And the building there, the windows were up. There was a beautiful breeze came through. And he said he was just really enjoying it. And right before the worship service started, people got up really quick, shut all the windows down. And he said, oh no, let's leave the windows open. It's a very beautiful day. They said they have passed a law in Switzerland that church worship cannot be heard outside the walls. Nobody can hear. Otherwise, the government will fine you. And Matt Vega, with what he knows about law, he said, it's coming here faster than you know. And he said, a nation that has permitted religious freedom for this amount of time, how many years did they declare independence in 1776? And then when did they write the Constitution with all of those things about religious freedom? 17. Yeah. And so he said that many years, over 200 years of religious freedom has been unheard of in history. And maybe because of apathy, I don't know, the Church of Christ grew at phenomenal rates from the 1800s and then in the 1930s, 1940s. And you know what they said about Church of Christ members? They said those people know their Bible. They know their Bible. And have we slipped? Obviously. And there's a certain amount of apathy, really. We've had it easy for a long time, and now we're being challenged again. And our faith is going to be challenged, and things are not always going to be the way they have been with us growing up, and we're going to have to stand firm for our beliefs. Let me tell you, I know I told you I was going to end. Do you want me to tell you another story, or do you want to?
Yes, Paul, continue on.
Okay.
If Paul could say finally.
Let's turn out the lights so it's getting close to midnight. There is a letter, it's called Pliny's the Younger's Letter to Trajan. How many have ever heard of that? Look it up. You need to know this. I've got a whole sermon about this. But in that letter, Pliny is writing Trajan. And Pliny has been given the governorship of Bithynia. And Bithynia is the area, the region that Paul was forbidden to go to by the Holy Spirit, but to go, and he ends up going over to Macedonia. But Bithynia gets the word another way somehow, because there are Christians there, and Pliny the Younger has never encountered Christians. He doesn't know, he's heard about them, but he doesn't know what to do. And so he said, at first he was trying to do this one thing, and then people were turning in people they didn't like and saying they were Christians just to get them persecuted. And then, so he was trying to find true Christians. And he said a true Christian cannot be forced to deny Christ. And a true Christian will not worship any other God. And so if I can get them to come in and give an offering to the gods and to you, Trajan, to worship, and they will deny Christ, is it acceptable that I let these people go? And Trajan wrote back, and they have a copy of the letter. Trajan said, yes, my dear Pliny, this is acceptable. This is and just summarize it. The people that were not Roman citizens were dealt with in Bithynia. They were killed. The people that were Roman citizens and found to be Christians were sent to Rome to go to trial. Roman citizens, they could appeal directly to Caesar. Now, a Roman citizen, if they were found for a capital offense, which at this time Christianity was, since they were trying to thwart it, they would have to either accept a soldier's death, a soldier would kill them quickly, or they could commit suicide. Now, if they committed suicide, their family would inherit all of that they owned. Otherwise, if they took the soldier's death, the family did not inherit anything, and the government took all of their goodly and worldly possessions. Now, what did I
You
say?
have that backward. Maybe you have that backward. I
What?
thought you said if they committed suicide, that their family forfeited their possessions.
No, if I did say that, the family got all their possessions. If they took the soldier's death, the government got all their possessions. Now, Pliny, when he was writing to Trajan, he says, so what I found out about the Christian religion is they gather at a specific time on a specific day, early in the morning. They take sacraments and they take vows, and basically they worship. And he had 2 slave women that were Christians, and he tortured them to get more information out of them. And he got that much information out of them. And I looked to see how far they could torture slave women. There were no boundaries. They could scourge them. They could do whatever they wanted. So there was no boundaries with that. So who knows what happened to those 2 women. One thing to think about is these are the conditions to worship God in the first century. These people were growing. Here's the other thing. They were accommodating. You had Roman citizens, because he says in the letter there are some Roman citizens that he's sending to Rome. But then you have slaves. You have these Roman citizens, these slaves, and why do you think they gathered at such an early hour in the morning? I believe it was to accommodate the slave schedule. And the wealthy people were accommodating, and that they would all come together. And do you think that was beautiful in God's eyes? Don't you think? How beautiful are the death of his saints. Then Pliny writes, and he says, already, the temples have begun to be revisited. And he's talking about the Roman temples, the pagan and the idolatry. And the marketplace is once again making money. Guess what happened? The Christians were teaching and people were becoming Christian. Then what happened to the economy? People stopped doing evil. But that was making money. That's what happens when people become Christians. You put away the worldly stuff. And I think that might have been a problem for the United States in the 1970s through the 60s, that we were having so much fun and we weren't abstaining from the worldly stuff. It didn't hurt the world like it should. You know, you can still buy movies that don't have things in them that really you ought to watch. Do you buy things that really, I was at Costco and there's a brand of some type of food and it was a flaming curse word right there on the package. And I said, I would never eat that because I would not want to contribute to the company that has a name like that. Do you think like that? Finally there are enough people they may not be all Christians, but enough people are getting sick of the DEI movement and all this other stuff that they're making a dent in these companies' profits, and they're starting, a few of them, to rethink what they're selling. But some of them still haven't changed. Christians can still make a difference. And we can do that. Think about what you do, what you spend your money on. And it made a difference in the first century because it was shutting down that economy of idolatry.